Welcome to today's episode of the Imago Leadership Podcast, where we explore the habits, stories, and spiritual insights that shape effective leadership teams. In this series, we've been walking through what I call the Big 10 culture killers of effective leadership teams. Those subtle but destructive dynamics that erode trust, diminish mission, and fracture community. If you are interested in reading more about these culture killers, please read the blog series on our website at imagoleadership.org. In previous episodes, we've discussed two of these culture killers, the soundproof room and stories that burn. Today, we're going to focus on the next four of these culture killers, and then we'll finish the series next month with the last four. But today, we're going to focus on conflict without a compass, when teams avoid or mismanage conflict. Number two, the stunted mirror, when leaders stop growing and become trapped in self-deception. Thirdly, lone wolves in shared fields, when power operates without accountability. And finally, the compliance cage, when HR practices prioritize policy over people. Each of these represents a different way that leadership cultures can drift off course. But each also offers us a chance to reform, to rediscover God's vision for reconciliation, growth, and accountability, and human flourishing. Why are these four so important? Because they touch the core of how teams function, how we handle disagreement, how we grow, how we share power, how we care for people. If any of these areas are neglected, the mission itself suffers. So in this episode, we'll not only diagnose the problem, but also explore the redemptive possibilities. We'll look at scripture, literature, and real-world organizational stories, and we'll end each section with practical questions and practices you can take back to your own team. So let's begin with the first culture killer, conflict without a compass. Conflict is unavoidable, yet many leadership teams treat it as an obstacle to get past so that they can return to the real work. Sometimes they're even surprised by it. The problem is conflict is part of the real work. Think about your own experience. How many times have you sat in a meeting where tension was thick in the air, but no one named it? Or perhaps someone exploded in anger, leaving others wounded and silent. Both avoidance and mismanagement of conflict are destructive. In Matthew 18, Jesus reminds his disciples that when two or three gather in his name, he is present among them. That includes moments of disagreement. Could it be that the Spirit of Jesus is not only present in conflict, but actively working through it? The danger comes when teams enter conflict without a compass. Without clear norms, conflict becomes the Wild West. Fight, flight, or freeze. Everyone does what's right in their own eyes. Everyone brings their own personality and baggage into the conflict, and they react the way that they're used to, but not in a way that's necessarily good for the team. Type A personalities tend to dominate. Honor-shame cultures try to save face. Sensitive members withdraw. Everyone does what's right in their own eyes. A compass requires two things. First, a narrative theology of reconciliation. Conflict isn't just about winning arguments, it's about embodying God's mission of reconciliation. Paul reminds us in 2 Corinthians 5 that we are entrusted with the ministry of reconciliation. That means that conflict is not a distraction, it's a sacred opportunity. So we really need to develop our theology of reconciliation and let that theology be woven into the culture and into the ways of thinking of our team. And secondly, explicit team norms. Teams need agreed upon practices for handling conflict. That's the only way for people to get past their kind of default ways of reacting and act in a way that they can be held accountable for within the context of their team. Documenting these norms reduces toxic reactions and keeps everyone aligned. Let's pause here. Imagine a leadership team that has no agreed upon way to handle conflict. One member raises a concern about workload, another interprets it as criticism, a third tries to smooth things over but ends up silencing the concern. The meeting ends with unresolved tension, and over time, these patterns erode trust. Now imagine the same team with a conflict compass. They begin by reminding themselves of their shared commitment to reconciliation. They may even spend time in scripture before they try to delve into the conflict itself. That's a very appropriate way to begin discussions of conflict. They have agreed to listen without interruption, to ask clarifying questions, and to seek understanding before offering solutions. The concern is raised, discussed openly, and addressed constructively. The team leaves stronger, not weaker. Conflict, then, is not the enemy of mission. It is the crucible in which mission is refined. It is the place where creativity emerges, where differences become gifts, and where reconciliation embodies the gospel. So here's some practical questions for your team. Do we have explicit norms for handling conflict? How do we remind ourselves of God's call to reconciliation during disagreements? Are we more likely to avoid conflict, dominate it, or absorb it silently? Conflict without a compass destroys teams, but conflict with a compass transforms them into reconciling communities that discern and innovate together. Our second culture killer is what I call the stunted mirror. It's the moment when leaders stop growing, both personally and collectively, and they become trapped in self-deception. The reality is that our mission is always changing because the environments in which our mission is being carried out is changing. And so leaders need to keep growing. If they don't keep growing, they become stagnant in their ability to lead. Let's illustrate. Let's turn to J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. In this novel, Harry discovers the Mirror of Erised, which shows the deepest desires of one's heart. For Harry, it reveals his longing for family, but Dumbledore warns him it does not do to dwell on dreams and forget to live. Leaders often fall into their own Mirror of Erised. Their noble aspirations, such as team well-being or mission integrity, become distorted. They confuse their ideals with reality. And because those ideals sound so right, team members feel powerless to challenge them. The result is resentment, discouragement, and stagnation. Leaders actually become a glass ceiling. The organization can only grow to the extent that leaders are able to allow it to. I've seen this in organizations where leaders cling to lofty vision but ignore practical realities. A leader insists that faith means never slowing down, even when the team is exhausted. Another insists that excellence means perfection, leaving no room for mistakes or growth. These ideals sound noble, but they become oppressive. Breaking free requires reflection in three directions. Inward, what values and desires drive my leadership? Upward, who is truly at the center, Jesus or me? And outward, how do others experience my leadership? This reflection dismantles the stunted mirror and replaces it with what I call the kingdom telescope. Instead of gazing inward at our own ideals, we look outward at God's expansive purposes and the overlooked beauty of others. And we look to sharpen our axe for that. We look to continue to expand our skills and vision and growth because we see the breathtaking vision of what God has laid before us. Practical tools like the Daily Examine help leaders cultivate humility and teachability. Questions such as, where did I surrender control to Jesus today? Or how did my leadership create space for others to flourish? Keep us grounded. The danger of the stunted mirror is subtle. It masquerades as noble aspiration, but if it's unchecked, it stunts growth and blinds leaders to the mission beyond themselves. The kingdom telescope, by contrast, magnifies God's purposes and invites leaders to become explorers of his kingdom. So, practical questions for your team. What ideals or values might be functioning as a stunted mirror in our leadership? How do we invite feedback from others about their experience of our leadership? Does it stifle them or enable them, empower them? What practices help us look outward at God's purposes and at others' gifts? The stunted mirror diminishes mission. The kingdom telescope expands it. Our next culture killer is called lone wolves in shared fields. This happens when empowerment neglects accountability, when the me overshadows the we. The cautionary tale of the Mars Hill Church illustrates this vividly, where Pastor Mark Driscoll's charisma and vision attracted thousands, but over time, unchecked authority led to bullying, spiritual abuse, and toxic culture. His infamous statement, "There is a pile of dead bodies behind the Mars Hill bus," revealed a leadership ethic that sacrificed people for mission. This isn't just about one leader. It's about systems that allow lone wolves to thrive and destroy people. When accountability structures weaken, when boards rubber stamp decisions of charismatic leaders, and when their charisma outweighs character, leaders can consolidate power unchecked. This is where the power of community is incredibly important in leadership. Literature gives us another lens. Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, for example. In this story, Kurtz, the ivory trader, becomes a godlike figure in the Congo, indulging in unchecked power and savagery. Alone, without accountability, he collapses into corruption. Jesus offers a radically different vision in John 10 of the Good Shepherd. Unlike the hired hand who abandons the sheep, the Good Shepherd lays down his life for them. Leadership shaped by the shepherd listens empathetically, reconciles differences, and honors others. Teams can resist lone wolf dynamics by asking hard questions. Whose voices are we listening to? Are HR decisions reflecting mercy or liability? Are we building fences or opening gates? These examine questions shift focus from self-preservation to communal care. So here's some practical questions for you and your team. Do our structures prioritize accountability as much as empowerment? How do we ensure that charisma never outweighs character? And where might we be tolerating toxic behaviors masked by productivity? The danger of lone wolves in shared fields is systemic, but the antidote is clear. Shared discernment, sacrificial leadership, and accountability rooted in the heart of the Good Shepherd. Finally, let's talk about the compliance cage. This culture killer emerges when HR practices prioritize policy over people. Charles Dickens's Hard Times critiques industrial society's obsession with efficiency and facts. Characters like Louisa and Tom suffer emotional starvation, while Sissy Jupe embodies compassion and loyalty. Dickens reminds us that true humanity is not found in statistics, but in love and imagination. Modern HR often inherits this industrial mindset. Overwhelmed by regulations and liability concerns, HR can become a maze of red tape. Managers feel frustrated, employees feel unseen, the human in human resources gets lost. But HR is more critical now than ever. In diverse, globalized workplaces, HR has the potential to be a strategic partner in mission. The shift from HR to people and culture signals this possibility. Breaking free from the compliance cage requires recentering HR on development and flourishing. Practical steps include mission-aligned onboarding. Instead of overwhelming new hires with policies and procedures, immerse them in the organization's values, story, and communal commitments. This builds belonging from day one. Vocational development planning. Replace generic performance reviews with personalized growth plans. Ask, what are this person's gifts? Where do they want to grow? How does their role connect to the mission? Relational leadership training. Equip managers not just to supervise tasks, but to cultivate trust, empathy, and discernment. This shifts leadership from transactional to transformational. Wellness and flourishing programs address emotional, spiritual, and relational health alongside physical and financial metrics. Flourishing employees are more resilient and creative. Feedback as formation. Move beyond numeric ratings. Use storytelling, reflection, and dialogue to foster mutual learning. Conflict transformation frameworks. Train HR and leadership teams in reconciliation practices that honor dignity and restore relationships. Cultural and missional intelligence, especially in global teams, integrate cultural humility and missional awareness. Diversity becomes a strategic asset, not a compliance checkbox. Learning cohorts and peer formation. Facilitate cross-functional communities where staff explore leadership, identity, and purpose together. Role clarity and communal contribution. Help teams articulate not just what they do, but how their roles contribute to the shared mission. And finally, HR as a strategic partner. Position HR as a co-leader in organizational strategy, shaping culture and talent development rather than simply enforcing policy. When HR integrates compliance into a broader people-first strategy, it safeguards the organization while advancing its mission. The compliance cage is real, but it can be dismantled by reimagining HR as a strategic partner in mission and in cultivating human flourishing. So here's some practical questions for your team. Are our HR practices primarily about protecting the organization, or do they also develop people? How do our onboarding and performance reviews connect employees to the mission? Where might red tape be frustrating managers and staff, and how can we simplify? The compliance cage reminds us that organizations are human endeavors. Policies matter, but people matter more. When HR becomes a partner in flourishing, leadership teams thrive. We've explored 4 culture killers on today's podcast. First, conflict without a compass, when teams avoid or mismanage conflict. The stunted mirror, when leaders stop growing and become trapped in self-deception. Lone wolves in shared fields, when power operates without accountability. And finally, the compliance cage, when HR practices prioritize policy over people. Each represents a different way leadership teams can lose their way, but each also offers a redemptive alternative. Conflict without a compass can become conflict with a compass, guided by reconciliation and explicit norms. It can transform conflict into mission advancement. The stunted mirror can be replaced with the kingdom telescope, magnifying God's purposes and others' gifts and how they contribute and participate in God's mission. Lone wolves in shared fields can be transformed into shepherding communities that embody accountability and sacrificial leadership. And the compliance cage can be dismantled by recentering HR on people and flourishing. Together, these culture killers highlight a common theme. Leadership is relational, communal, and missional. When teams avoid conflict, stop growing, neglect accountability, or reduce people to policies, they undermine the very mission they seek to advance. But when they embrace reconciliation, humility, accountability, and human flourishing, they embody the kingdom of God in their leadership. They are a force to be reckoned with. Let's reflect more deeply on what this means. First, conflict and creativity. Conflict is not neutral. It is charged with emotion, history, and personality, but is also charged with possibility. When teams enter conflict with openness and humility, they discover new ideas, deeper trust, and stronger mission alignment. Conflict becomes a crucible for creativity. Ask yourself, how does your team currently handle conflict? Do you avoid it, dominate it, or absorb it silently? What would it look like to establish explicit norms and anchor conflict in reconciliation? Secondly, growth and self-deception. Leadership requires continual growth. When leaders stop reflecting inward, upward, and outward, they become trapped in self-deception. The stunted mirror blinds them to reality, but the kingdom telescope invites them to look outward, to magnify God's purposes and others' gifts. Ask yourself, what practices help you reflect on your leadership motives? How do you invite feedback from others? Where might your ideals be functioning as a stunted mirror? Thirdly, power and accountability. Power without accountability is dangerous. Lone wolves thrive when systems allow them to act unchecked. But leadership shaped by the Good Shepherd lays down its life for others. It listens, reconciles, and honors. Ask yourself, do your structures prioritize accountability as much as empowerment? How do you ensure that charisma never outweighs character? And where might toxic behaviors be tolerated because they're masked by productivity? And finally, policy and people. HR practices matter. Policies protect organizations, but when policies overshadow people, the compliance cage forms. HR must be reimagined as a strategic partner in mission and human flourishing. Ask yourself, are your HR practices primarily about compliance, or do they also develop people? How do onboarding and performance reviews connect employees to mission? And where might red tape be frustrating managers and staff? As we close, let's step back and consider the bigger picture. These four culture killers, conflict, mismanagement, stunted growth, unchecked power, and policy over people, are not isolated. They are interconnected. When conflict is avoided, growth stalls. When leaders stop growing, power consolidates. When power goes unchecked, HR becomes reactive. When HR prioritizes compliance, conflict is suppressed. The cycle feeds itself. But the gospel offers a different cycle: reconciliation, humility, accountability, and flourishing. Imagine a leadership team that embodies this cycle. Conflict is handled with openness and reconciliation. Leaders reflect inward, upward, and outward, continually growing. Power is shared and accountable, shaped by the Good Shepherd. And HR practices develop people and connect them to mission. Such a team becomes a reconciling community. It discerns together, it innovates together, it embodies God's kingdom together. This is the vision: leadership teams that are not destroyed by culture killers, but transformed into culture builders. So here's the invitation. Reflect on your team. Where do you see signs of these culture killers? What practices can you adopt to dismantle them? And how might your leadership become a reconciling, shepherding, flourishing presence in your community? Thank you for joining me today. May your leadership be marked not by culture killers, but by culture builders, practices that honor God, empower people, and advance mission. We'll see you next month.